Welcome back to our GROVES. I hope you guys have had an exciting discussion so far as we are in week 4 here of our How to Church series. Kind of going to go a different direction maybe today because as we talked about on Sunday morning in Paul's letter to the Ephesians, he kind of has this transition point where he goes from talking about who we are in Christ and our identity in Christ to talking about what that identity in Christ starts to look like as it's fleshed out. And so this week we're going to kind of do some of that transition as well in our GROVES. And one of the things I want to talk about today as we talk about how to church is this word that maybe, I don't know if it's going to have a positive or a negative connotation with you, but it's this word consistency. And it's this idea of patterns and rhythms. And I was kind of brought to light kind of some of my past when it comes to these terms is I had this conversation with my son Bodie. I was talking to the phone with him the other day. He was telling me about some of the classes. He's had to have some tests recently, and so he was telling me about his grades on his tests. And he said one of the ones he was worried about was he was getting back this test he was getting back from his cultural anthropology class because he was talking about how it's kind of subjective, the answers, because it's more about what you think and how you feel and not so much just here's the straight, objective answer. And it kind of made me have these flashbacks to when I was in college many, many years ago now. But some of you guys may know this, some of you may not know. But I was actually a minor in anthropology. And so when Bodie mentioned cultural anthropology, my ears kind of perked up. I'm like, oh yeah, back to the days. Because I remember as a freshman, I took a cultural anthropology class and I absolutely loved it and kind of fell in love with it, which is why I became an anthropology minor, because I just found it fascinating. This idea of different cultures and different peoples and why they do what they do and just all these different cultures around the world and studying them and the differences between cultures. And I remember one time we were in a class and it was an ethnography class, and one of our assignments we did in this class was we went to Mexico for a weekend, and we actually just lived with these families in Tijuana, Mexico. And I remember for me it was no big deal because I'd been to Mexico multiple times on mission trips, but for a lot of the other people in my class, they were freaking out. So they were freaking out about this assignment because we were going to just live with these families, and we weren't living like in the upper crust. We were just kind of going to the lower, some poverty-stricken areas, and actually slept on the floor in this family's house. And I remember one of the things about anthropology was studying people. And so what we were trying to figure out is when you live with people, when you kind of live and walk with them, it's what can you observe about these people and their values based on just walking with them, with living with them? What can you observe? What's observable about their culture, about what they think, about how they do things? And so it kind of got me thinking when it comes to the series How to Churches is when you think about church, if you think about Christians in America, when you think about us as Rising Church, if you were to have somebody come along, an ethnographer, and they were to live with us and they were to observe us, what would they think about what distinguishes us from other peoples? Like what kind of rhythms are there in our lives? What kind of patterns are there in our lives that are observable that you could kind of say, well, this is what they're about? For example, if you were to go to maybe live in a Muslim family, you would see, okay, what are the patterns that are observable that I can see happening over and over and over again in their family, which is what makes them distinctly Muslim. So is it, their prayer times? Is it what they eat, how they eat, what they talk about? Like I said, their prayer times. Like what can I observe? If I were to be with a Buddhist family, what are some of those patterns that I would be able to pick up on over time, living with them and watching them to see, well, what does it mean for them to be a Buddhist family? And so when you think about that with us, if we were to have somebody come in who didn't have any clue what Christianity was, didn't have any clue about any of this stuff, and they were just to sit and observe, what would be the predictable patterns that they would notice in our lives that would make us distinctly different from anybody else, that they would say, well, this is what they do because they're believers, because they're Christians, and this is how their lives are distinguishable from other people's based on what they actually do. And so that's kind of what I want you guys to be talking about today is, as believers, what are our predictable patterns? What are the rhythms in our daily life that somebody could observe that would be like, well, that's different than maybe what these people are doing or what these people are doing? And why is that important? It makes me think about when you have kids. When you have kids, one of the things you want to do as a parent is you want to establish kind of some patterns, because if a kid has no consistency, if there's no rhythm, if there's no pattern, then it can be kind of chaotic and they don't really know what's going on. So that's why you kind of have your daily schedule. You have these different things that you do on an ongoing basis. And so it gives them that steadiness so they can become who they want them to become. Or if you want to teach your kid a certain thing, then you have some kind of pattern that you develop so they will over and over and over again be introduced to this thing so that eventually they'll embrace it or they'll learn it. And so what are those things when it comes to the church, specifically today? Because when you look at Acts, which you're going to do in a minute, you see some of the predictable patterns, the rhythms that the church operated on in the early church. You're going to be reading Acts chapter 2, and it says these are things that the church didn't go to. These weren't events. This is just what they were all about. And so if I was an ethnographer, if I was an anthropologist, now we're looking at the early church, I just say, well, here's kind of the characters. Here are the characteristics. Here are the things that they do that are observable, and the patterns that I see over and over and over again. And this is what makes them distinct from all these other people. And so what would those be for us today? So when you think about how to church, what are the predictable patterns in our lives that people could observe that they would say, this is what makes them a Christian? This is what it looks like to be a Christian. Here's kind of the things that they do. Here's what they're about. Here's what they talk about. Here's some of the things that they participate in. What are those things? And maybe even as we start discussing, what should they be? When you think about what it means to how to church, what should our patterns be? And are we actually doing any patterns? Are we consistent? Or is it kind of haphazard and all over the place? Or are there certain things that we do consistently over and over again that we would call rhythms, predictable patterns that help us become who God made us to be and to be the church that He's called us to be? And so I hope this has kind of stirred some stuff in your thoughts and minds, because that's what you're going to be talking about today. I hope you have a great discussion. And actually next week we won't see you because we're taking an intermission, but we'll be back after fall break, where we'll be really diving into more and more of the how-to church when it comes to the practical application of that idea. So hope you guys have a great discussion, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Blessings and peace. Oh, wait. Peace and blessings.